light editing. Don't worry, you are not going to be recorded. Only those of us who are unmuted and speaking into the camera and the microphone are part of that. So you will not be part of that recording. You don't need to be worried about that. When we get to the audience question and answer portion of the evening, you can type your questions into the chat and either Davith or I will pose them for you. And indeed, if you come up with questions as we're going and want to ask them early, you can put them into the chat and we'll save them up and get to them at the end of the event. So please feel free to use that at any time with your questions. And then one more important note. I think all of you know that these are crazy and difficult and uncertain times for lots of small independent businesses, all of the local businesses that you love. One thing that you can do to really help us and your other favorite local businesses out is to shop early and shop local this holiday season. So thank you so much for taking that into account. It really helps us to deal with supply chain issues and all of the uncertainties, and will help the other businesses you love as well. Without further ado, I'm going to turn things over to Davith now to introduce our guest this evening.
Well, thank you so much, Rachel. And it is a real pleasure to introduce tonight Sharon Salzberg. She is a central figure in the field of meditation, one of the most esteemed teachers of meditation in the world, and a New York Times bestselling author. She's played a crucial role in bringing meditation and mindfulness practices to the West and into mainstream culture since 1974, when she first began teaching. She's the co-founder of the Insight Meditation Society in Barre, Massachusetts, and the author of several books, including the New York Times bestseller, Real Happiness, her seminal work, Loving Kindness, and Real Happiness at Work. She is a regular columnist for On Being, a contributor to Huffington Post, and the host of her own podcast, The Meta Hour. Today, she's joining us for her latest book, Real Change, Mindfulness to Heal Ourselves and the World, a guidebook for how to use mindfulness to build our inner strength, find balance, and create a better world. Joining us tonight is Chris Morrow, owner of Northshire Bookstore. He grew up in the bookstore, which was started when he was 9 years old, and spearheaded the opening of Northshire's second location in Saratoga Springs, New York. Additionally, he serves on the boards of directors of the American Booksellers Association and the Book Industry Charitable Foundation. Please welcome to Northshire Live, Chris Morrow and Sharon Salzberg.
Well, thank you so much for having me. It's a real delight to be here.
Thanks for joining us. It's a pleasure. We haven't had you for a few years since your last book. We always enjoy when you have a new book coming out. And so I guess we're going to start by you saying a few words about the book and then.
Fabulous. Thank you. I was struck when you were reading the list of some of those books, how I'm now on the real train, you know. There was Real Happiness and Real Happiness at Work and Real Love and Real Change. And in fact, in all honesty, it was a joke title, Real Change. You thought, what should we call it? We said, call it Real Change. And then we couldn't think of anything else. So it should have stayed. So I wrote the book and turned it in. It was either December or January, before the pandemic was really obvious here. And I wrote it because for a number of different reasons. One is I've been teaching meditation since 1974, so it's a good long time. And I know a lot of meditators, obviously, who through their practice of greater awareness and introspection develop a very deep and true kind of compassion for others, a sense of connection to others, but don't always know how to take action, where to move, how to try in some way to make this a better world. And I've also, in the last several years of my teaching career, spent a lot of time working with caregivers, people who either in their personal lives have someone in their family, or in their professional lives, they're working in domestic violence shelters, international humanitarian aid workers, these days a lot of frontline medical workers, people who are on the front lines of suffering, really trying to make this a better world, who have huge amounts of compassion or empathy and are burning out for other reasons. And our effort, those of us working in those programs, has been to see if contemplative tools of mindfulness, mindful movement like yoga, loving kindness, could help people sustain those efforts. And one day it occurred to me, you know, activists are a lot like those caregivers, people who are on the front lines of suffering, often dealing with a seemingly intractable system, burning out quite a lot. So it was really trying to see if I had something to offer to both these groups. So that's what motivated me to write the book. And I turned it in, and then the pandemic happened and the publication date got postponed. And at one point I went back to the publisher and I said, would it be okay with you if I wrote a new preface to somehow try to ground the book in our current situation more? So they said, okay. And my overriding question for myself in the effort to write that preface was, what's still true? Like in the midst of upheaval and chaos and anxiety and grief and so many things, like what's still true? And it reminded me of, in Sanskrit, the word dharma, which is usually translated as the truth of things or the nature of things or the laws of nature, or sometimes the Buddha's teaching. It actually means that which upholds us, that which supports us, that which we can rely on. So it's kind of like the same question, like what's still true? I thought about a passage I had read quite some years ago about how in Hiroshima, after the atom bomb dropped, in the midst of, you know, terrible devastation, there was actually further devastation because this rumor spread that grass and trees and flowers would no longer grow. Like the laws of nature themselves had been blown apart. And as awful as things were, there was an increased feeling of being able to go on when that rumor was dispelled. And people realized, yes, in fact, trees and flowers and grass will grow again. And so it was like something is still intact. Something is still whole, even in the midst of it all. So I spent, you know, time really scrutinizing for me, what's still true? What is intact? What's whole? What's holding me up? And I came back to, interestingly enough, a lot of the many things I had written in the book about meditation practice and the tools of centering and taking rest, about extracting the energy out of anger without being completely overwhelmed by it and sort of burning up, about finding in a way the love that is at the heart of grief. Someone once talked about grief as being love that doesn't have the normal place to land, and moving from grief to resilience. I had written a chapter on remembering to take in the joy. And that was especially about an activist friend of mine from years ago who was doing incredible work. And he was miserable in part because he never allowed himself to enjoy anything. He felt too guilty, you know. And I had a chapter on interconnection, which I believe very strongly is the truth of life. And the more we tune into that, the more transformed we are. And the more we understand that, we use a construct like self and other and us and them, which is a useful construct, but it also doesn't speak to a certain level of reality, which is like we. And my favorite example of that actually is I was riding in a car with a friend, and we were stuck in this terrible, horrible, awful traffic and complaining bitterly about it the entire time. And then my friend turned to me and said, well, we're the traffic too, you know. And I thought, oh, right. You know, like what an odd feeling before. It's like, I'm in the center of the universe. This is my road. You are an interloper, all of you. You're in my way. You're slowing me down. But what about when that sense of like centrality and marginalization drops? Then it's just we. Here we are together. And you know what? We've got a problem. We've got traffic. But that's reality. And so I believe very strongly in the power of coming closer and closer to reality. And I have a chapter on equanimity, which does not mean indifference or callousness or coldness, but it's almost like a mind and heart big enough to hold the joy and the sorrow and the immediate situation we may see and a vision of possibility and inner work and outer work and all of it together. So, and underpinning all of that is because I don't know how much we get as a benefit when it's simply abstract, or ideas. Underpinning all of that are practices of mindfulness, of centering, of being with difficult feelings, of remembering to take in the joy, and of loving kindness and compassion toward ourselves and toward others. So that's the book.
Yeah, the book's fantastic. I really enjoyed it. And what I've read a lot of meditation books. So what I really liked about this book was, you bringing it, making it real, so it was a good title, because, you quoted so many practitioners of, not meditation practitioners, but the caregivers and people out in the world doing good things and how they're working with their lives and their environments and their struggles. And so going back and forth between Dharma and, real life change agents and the struggles therein, I found was very effective. And I think it will be very beneficial to people. So thank you for writing it.
Thank you. Actually, I'll also say that the book, as all books, I think it was a process, which I learned a lot. And one of the things that happened was that somewhere kind of early on, I had a conversation with Bell Hooks, who said to me she didn't really like the term social action because she thought that perhaps people would only think about marching or protesting. And she said to me, what about art? And that became a very important conversation for me because I thought, well, yeah, what about art? What about creativity of different kinds that helps dissolve our sense of stuckness and reveals the sense of possibility to us? So amongst those people that I tried to include in the book, I tried to include artists and writers and people like that.
Absolutely. So do you want to do a short meditation, or do you want to jump right in here? Let's do a little meditation.
Let's do a little meditation. Why not? One of the words that's been very important for me, just in considering my meditation practice, is the word rest. And so what I like to do, this will just be for a few minutes, really, is to choose an object of awareness, which is commonly something like the feeling of the breath, the sensation of the in and out breath, just the normal, natural breath. And if that doesn't work for you for some reason, that's fine. You can choose like your hands touching, some sensation that's already happening anyway. And the operative word actually is rest. In my earliest practice, I know that I was very frightened. I was 18. I was very frightened. I was very hypervigilant. And it was very difficult for me just to feel the breath. I used to say to myself, settle back. Let the breath come to you. Because as soon as this breath was happening, I kind of be mentally leaning forward for the next 50. And I also used to say to myself, you're breathing anyway. All you need to do is feel it, because I had so much performance anxiety. It's like I'd never done it before. So it's like, settle back. Let the breath come to you. Rest your attention on the breath. And then you will find your attention wanders all over the place. There's almost no doubt about that. It's okay. When you realize that, see if you can gently let go and just come back. Okay, so we'll sit together for a few minutes. You can sit comfortably, close your eyes or not, depending on where you are. If you're driving, please don't. Or if you're uncomfortable in some way with your eyes closed, please don't. It's really fine. See if you can find that place where the breath is strongest for you or clearest for you. Maybe it's the nostrils, the chest, or the abdomen. Bring your attention there and just rest. See if you can feel one breath without concern for what's already gone by, without leaning forward for even the very next breath, just this one. If images or sounds or sensations or emotions should arise, but they're not that strong, if you can stay connected to the feeling of the breath, just let them flow on by. You're breathing. It's just one breath. If something does pull you away, you get lost in thought, or spun out in a fantasy, or you fall asleep, truly don't worry about it. See if you can let go gently. Just come back. And when you feel ready, you can open your eyes or lift your gaze, and we'll end the meditation. So that was 3 minutes. That was a nice break from the tumult of life.
So I want to start with a couple of just foundational questions, and then we'll move into more specific questions about things you bring up in the book. Can you just give us a basic definition of mindfulness?
Sure. The word is used in a lot of different ways, and so that's why I was smiling. So classically, mindfulness means a quality of awareness or attention where there aren't so many filters, there are not so many add-ons, and we have a kind of cleaner, clearer view of what our experience is. So one example would be if we feel physical pain, or we feel heartache, we feel disappointment. Very commonly, we start adding, what's it going to feel like tomorrow? What's it going to feel like next week? What's it going to feel like next month? So not only do we have the actual thing happening, we have all that anticipation and anxiety on top of it. That's what I mean by an add-on. So our experience of what is really distorted. Or maybe some emotion arises, and all our lives we felt like I shouldn't feel that. I've got to make it go away. And so we kind of are trying to avoid it. Or something glorious arises and we grab it like, I can't ever let this leave, which never works either. So we have so many ways of just habitually relating to our experience that lead us to hold on or push away or just be kind of automatically reactive. And so what we want to do is just create some space where we can be with the experience more fully as it is. And that's really what mindfulness is.
Great, thank you. So kind of a corollary to that is I'd like you to describe our basic innate nature, or our unconditioned mind. What were the characteristics of an awakened mind / heart? So there's still misconceptions about meditation, that you're trying to attain something, right? If you could just speak to what we're being mindful of when we're actually not adding on.
Well, we would say that what we're mindful of when we're not in that process of proliferation or adding on is whatever's happening. And it opens the door for us to be able to see more deeply through any vehicle at all, because we can be mindful of joy, we can be mindful of sorrow, we can be mindful of delight, we can be mindful of pain, because mindfulness is about relationship. It's about how we're relating to what's happening. And so we see into a deeper reality because the nature of our looking is pretty uncluttered in some way. So we see things that I think are very personally insightful. Like I've often talked about sitting and looking at my own fear as one example, where we would, what we have to do in that kind of exercise is pivot. Usually when we have a strong emotion, all of our energy, all of our attention is going toward the object, the story, the projection. And we're not really looking like, what does fear feel like? What is its nature? So we make that pivot, like, what does it feel like in my body? What's its nature? And what I've seen, just as one example of a personal insight, is that unlike the world's pronouncement that, which is also true, that we're afraid of the unknown, I'm really afraid when I think I do know, and it's going to be really bad. And it's all the stories that I tell myself that really get me going. And so when I remind myself of that, then I relax and there's some space. So that's like a personal insight. And the more we look at anything, the more we see, look at that, everything is changing, everything is moving, everything is transitory. There's actually nothing solid. Strong emotion might come up and we identify with it so strongly, like, I'm such an angry person, I always will be, rather than seeing it's coming and going. And somehow also in the process of that much introspection through meditation, we also come to a deep, deep visceral understanding of how connected we all are. That however alone or cut off we might feel, that actually the reality is that our lives are intertwined. So we see some very universal truths. In terms of our basic nature, that's reflected in our capacity to see. That it's said that certainly in the Buddhist tradition and many traditions, that we have a potential, we have a capacity, every single one of us, for love, for connection, for clarity, for understanding. It's like a little seed form inside us. And it may be covered over, it may be hard to find, it may be hard to trust, but absolutely it's there. And it can never be destroyed as a potential, as a capacity. And so that's the basis upon which we practice something like meditation. It's like we can grow, we can change, we can come to a place of greater understanding.
Great, thank you. You touched on this in your intro, but I'm going to read a short paragraph from the book and ask you to comment on it. You say, many of us are familiar with the spectrum of depletion. We just can't catch up. We feel overwhelmed and exhausted. We no longer find meaning in what we are doing. We burn out, or we are actively traumatized as we absorb the trauma of those we work with or live with or deeply care about. So that there's that kind of energy that a lot of us are dealing with. And then there's, right now it's a potent time with the stress and anxiety of politics and COVID. So can you talk a little bit about how meditation, how to skillfully work with these feelings and emotions?
I would say, first of all, we have to recognize this is a hard time. In some other era of life, this woman came to me and she was sort of like, she was pretty down on herself. Like, I don't know why I'm not doing better. I should have more calm. I've been meditating for however long, or I should be better. And I said to her, what I'd like you to do is just make a list of everything you've gone through in the last year. And she chose instead to draw it out. So she made like this drawing. And then we looked at it and I said, I want you to look at what's on this piece of paper, like your house burnt down, your cat got sick, you got estranged from your brother, like there's a lot. And coping is not always that easy. And I think that is a place that we need to really begin in a way. It's like we are going through a lot. And whatever your life looks like, whether you're isolated at home or you are doing childcare at home or you're out working in the world, or it's a lot. Like I'm here in my home in Barre, Massachusetts. The retreat center, the Insight Meditation Society, is next door, now closed. I spent the month of February in California, which I find I often talk about. It's like I went somewhere. It was like an epic journey, I was somewhere else. I got back to New York City, where I also rent a small apartment in early March. And I just started feeling, this doesn't feel good. This really doesn't feel good. And unlike many people, I had an alternative. I have a house here. And I thought, okay, I'll go up to Barre for a couple of weeks. So I came up here with my snow boots on March 14th. And by the time my third season hit, of the autumn, I just was back in New York for a week for the first time in 7 months. And I thought, this is so intense, to have left a life with a lot of seeming knowns and expectations and thinking, oh, this is going to happen. And then my book's going to come out, then I'm going to travel. And then I'm going to, it's like none of it. And so I think we have to give ourselves a break fundamentally. And then I come back to understanding that the stress dynamic is actually a dynamic. It's always described that way. There's the pressure, the stressors, the incidents, the circumstance, and then there's the resource with which it's met. And that resource for me is primarily composed of two things. One is what I have developed in my meditation practice, or still developing in my meditation practice. And the other is some sense of community. And it's a very odd time in terms of fostering a sense of community, because maybe we can't go out, to a social situation or something like that. But it's an inner sense. I've always felt that, actually. It's an inner sense of connection. Even before the pandemic, when I'd read about epidemics of loneliness, or I'd read in health studies about the power of social connection and healing, I always thought, well, it can't just be numbers, like I've only got 2 friends, I need 5. It must be some kind of abiding sense of how connected we are and caring for others in that way. It's a dynamic, and we have every possibility of, we try to affect the circumstances when we can. And whether we can or not, we have so much power. I really believe that, in developing those resources.
So one of the Buddha's first teachings was the Four Noble Truths, which and the first one is basically, life has some unpleasantness in it, right? And you talk about that in one of your chapters, and you use the phrase "some things just hurt."
Ooh, here's my cup that says "some things just hurt." Can you see it?
Oh, there you go. So what's the freeing aspect of just acknowledging that suffering exists in our lives? I mean, there was a reason he started there, and you talk about that in your book. Can you just comment on that?
Yeah, I think it has many aspects to it. One is the reason that my friends made me a cup is because it's one of my sayings, some things just hurt. Because here too, I find people can quite unfairly blame themselves and, and think and say, well, it's only because of my attitude that it hurts, or if I weren't so resistant, it wouldn't hurt, or whatever. Some things just hurt. And I think if we understand that, then that's also a place we find one another. That's when I first encountered the Buddhist teaching in college. That was a tremendously important statement for me because, like many people, I'd had a very difficult and traumatic childhood. And like for many people, mine was a family where this was never spoken about. And so I felt different. I felt apart. And here was the Buddhist saying right out loud, this is a part of life, which was like a way of saying, you're not weird, you're not that different. It's not that we all suffer to the same degree, because we don't, but that vulnerability, the fact that life can change on a dime, that it's so fragile, we all share that. And so, first of all, that recognition should be the place where we find compassion for ourselves and one another, and we feel, again, a sense of community. The second thing is that there's such a thing as extra suffering, and a lot depends on how you use the words. People try to make a distinction between just the things of life, that hurt, and the ways we can then add shame or a sense of isolation or kind of bitterness, all kinds of things that actually only make it worse. And so sometimes people these days, they use the word pain for the first and suffering for the second to try to make a distinction. You don't have to. I mean, I'm not used to that particular vocabulary, but you could if you wanted. But the idea is really like, yes, there's some things we're not going to enjoy and say, oh, good, but we actually don't need to make them worse. There's this interesting study out of Richie Davidson's lab at the University of Wisconsin at Madison, where he actually got permission to induce physical pain in people. He's a neuroscientist. And it's interesting in a lot of ways because we also use physical pain as a model for emotional pain, all kinds of pain. And what he found, he had a group of people who'd been meditating for 8 weeks. He had a group of people who'd never meditated. And everyone's in an fMRI machine because he's a neuroscientist and he's looking at their brains. And they did whatever they did, to induce the pain. And what he found was that the most significant difference came not in people's reaction to the pain, because pain hurts, but after, like when the pain was withdrawn, the non-meditators right away would flip into a cycle of anticipation. When's it coming back? Maybe it'll be even worse. I know, I bet it's going to be worse. And so they never got any rest. They never got a reprieve. They never got a break. They never got any peace. Whereas the meditators might have a reaction, certainly to the pain, but the pain was withdrawn, they could relax and be in that actual moment fully. And that's a big difference in the quality of our lives, given how often physical or emotional pain may come our way. So it's things like that, we really don't need the extra stuff.
Mm-hmm. Well, so you touched on the word equanimity earlier. So clearly one of the byproducts of meditation is you're creating more space in your being for things to arise without reactivity. And sometimes the word equanimity is used. But you go to some length to expand on that and define that. Can you say a little bit more about that?
Yeah, it's a very difficult word. My first meditation teacher was S.N. Goenka. This was in India in January of 1971. And he used to say a lot, be equanimous, be equanimous, be equanimous. And we used to whisper to one another, is that a word? Like, what does that mean? I never even heard of that. So whether it's in that strange form or equanimity, it's hard to understand. It so often sounds to us like indifference or coldness or sullenness, like withdrawal from life. And it really doesn't mean that at all. Equanimity means balance, and it's like perspective. It's the voice of wisdom in combination with compassion. For example, it would be remembering, I will do everything I can, say with a friend, I will do everything I can to try to help you to ease the situation you're in. And I'm not in control of the universe. I can't make you behave in a certain way. In very contemporary terms, we would say we learn not to be codependent, right? It doesn't diminish the compassion. We care and we're present and we're trying, but it's with wisdom, which means balance. It might mean balance, back to those caregivers, of having compassion for yourself as well as for others. It might mean wisdom of understanding limits, like things don't change right away always. I have another cup over there in that direction that people made for me that says, well, when we first opened the Insight Meditation Society here in the 70s, we received 2 letters that were remarkable for how they were addressed within the first month of being open. And the first, instead of being addressed to the Insight Meditation Society, was addressed to the Instant Meditation Society. And and that's kind of a cultural norm. Like everything has to happen instantly. We have to have instant gratification or it's not worth it. But the second envelope, instead of being addressed to the Insight Meditation Society, was addressed to the Hindsight Meditation Society. And I just love that, because there have been so many times in my meditation life where I felt like nothing was happening. And then I looked back with some hindsight and I thought, oh, look at that. Something was happening. And so many times in my efforts to make a difference or be of service where I felt like, well, that went nowhere. And only later, when I'm lucky, do I hear, oh, you know what? You gave me that book at that moment. It didn't really mean much to me, but now my life is different and I picked it up. It was really important. So I love the phrase, the Hindsight Meditation Society. And every time that the Insight Meditation Society would have a significant anniversary, I'd say, can't we just make cups and caps and things like that say Hindsight Meditation Society on it? And every time they said no. But these friends finally made me some cups. I have like 5 over there or something like that. That say Hindsight Meditation Society. That's wisdom, actually. And the feeling it brings us, that sense of, okay, I will do everything and I need to let go. That's what equanimity is.
Thank you. If people have questions, please type them in. I want to make sure people have time or raise your hands. I want to follow up on that last question, or really the one about the first noble truth, and ask you to speculate a little bit. So there's some definitely some shared feeling of suffering going on in the country and the world, right? So in a way, it's completely unavoidable for, there's different degrees of suffering, right? Some of us have lost our jobs and are struggling much more severely than others, but even the most comfortable of us are perhaps isolated or, going through other anxieties. So I wonder if you think that once we get on the other side of this, there's going to be some benefit from this shared experience of suffering that we've had culturally and worldwide, obviously. Do you see any, that spurring some change, some positive change?
I think there's a lot of potential for that. I think we all need some help, in utilizing or relating to the situation in some way, because I think I've watched also kind of waves. Everyone is different and has different, responsibilities or different realities and so on. But there are also kind of commonalities, I think, and I could almost track it from anxiety to grief, to anger, to now exhaustion. And part of the exhaustion, I think, is that thought, I can't take 6 more months of this, So again, we're adding a future to right now. We can deal with a lot right now, but not now and, the next 2 years or something like that. And so I think it's fantastic if we could all pick up some tools of reminding ourselves, for example, we don't know, don't try to deal with 6 months from now, right now, or, do the good that's in front of you. Like when I was still in New York in early March, before I decided to come up here, I was teaching and they tended to be large groups, which was partly why it started feeling really strange. And I was doing this one class somewhere in New York, and the way they have it set up is that the speaker sits in the audience until they're introduced, and then they get up on the stage and they do the talk. So sitting in just down with the audience, and this woman sitting next to me was tremendously anxious, and she said, I don't know if I should come because nobody knew really anything, and but I decided to come, but maybe it was a mistake, and I just feel she was really overwrought. So I said, well, there's certain ways that we can use the breath, if you're interested, that actually balance out our whole nervous system. And that, by the way, is pretty simple. They say, scientists say that if your out breath is longer than your in breath, your parasympathetic nervous system will start to take over from your sympathetic nervous system. Your blood pressure will go down. You'll start to feel some greater calm. And there are lots of formal ways of doing that. Like you breathe in for 4, and then you maybe hold it, and then you breathe out for 8, but it doesn't matter. The only thing that matters is that your out breath is longer than your in breath. So I started describing some of that to this woman, and she was not interested. So then I said, well, there's loving kindness meditation, which can bring such a profound sense of connection. In fact, they say the Buddha taught that as the antidote to fear. So how about some of that? She was not interested in that either. So then I just looked at her and I said, is there anyone you can help? And she lit up. She just became like really radiant. And she said, oh, I have this elderly neighbor, and maybe I could slip a note under her door and see if I can do some shopping for her. Now, one of the incredibly weird things about our time is that the normal avenues we have are maybe not available. Maybe you can't do that particular thing, but there is something, and it will make a big difference. Because I was just back in New York, but even before then, I'm in touch with so many people there, and clearly things were very, very, very bad there. And people would say, I lived in this apartment for 12 years. I never even knew the names of any of my neighbors. And now we all have one another's names and phone numbers. And we check in on one another and make sure we're okay. Or I have a friend who's 86 years old. And he told me, I have the phone numbers of all the elderly people in my building. I noted that he didn't say the other elderly people. He said, of all the elderly people in my building, and I call them and I make sure they're okay. It's like, I wish we had more encouragement to do the good that's in front of us, even if it seems very small, because it will help us so much as well as make a difference for others.
Yeah, my hope is that there'll be a renewed sense of connection and compassion that comes out of this. So I want to pause here do we have any questions from the audience?
We do. I've got a question that Sherry S. sent me for Sharon. What suggestions do you have for beginners to develop better focus in meditation?
I think that there are a few things. One is, it's good to have some understanding of what to expect and what not to expect, because a lot of people go into something like practicing meditation with a lot of ideas about what should be happening. And they're usually pretty self-punishing because they're not going to happen. And, like there's so many times back when we were going to parties and things like that, where I'd be introduced as a meditation teacher somewhere, and somebody would say in response, "Oh, I tried that once, I failed at it." And we don't believe you can fail at it. So I'd say, "Well, what do you think you failed at it?" And they'd say, "I couldn't stop thinking. I couldn't make my mind go blank. I couldn't empty it out. I couldn't have only beautiful thoughts. I couldn't keep anxiety or sleepiness from coming up," whatever it is. And we would define mindfulness, as an example, as relationship. It's not about trying to annihilate thinking. It's not about trying to have a blank mind. It's about changing our relationship to what's going on. We don't have to take every thought to heart. And like I was teaching earlier today, I use this example. It's like, if you have the thought, "I want an avocado," and you're in Barre, Massachusetts, you've got to get in your car, and drive somewhere in the rain today to buy an avocado. You want to be able to see that thought and let it go before you're halfway there. What am I doing? Or you're angry and you don't even realize it, and you press send on that email, and then you go, "Whoops," that's a little hostile, isn't it? And we want to be able to know what we're thinking when we're thinking of it. We want to be able to know what we're feeling when we're feeling it. And so we're not talking about getting rid of anything. And people struggle so much thinking, "I'm not doing it right. I'm not doing well." It's really better to have an understanding of what to expect. So when we did that 3 minutes, I said, "Your mind will wander." That's the right thing to expect. And the important moment is what then happens, where we practice letting go and coming back. And we let go and we come back. And if you have to do that 10 billion times in your practice, it's not a problem. So that is a really good framework, I think, to pursue focus with. That's how it happens, actually. It's not like you're with 80 breaths instead of 2 breaths, but you're coming back sooner and sooner. And then I'm the kind of person that's very helped by structure. So my favorite neuroscientist friends say to me that, one said what he found in his lab was that 7 to 9 minutes of meditation a day will change your brain. And I was quoting that. So that means measurable change, And I'm not a neuroscientist, so I can't really describe all those, but apparently we want our brains to change in those particular ways. I was quoting him when I was on a Zoom panel with somebody, another neuroscientist friend of mine, and I could see from her face, she didn't look that happy. So I said, "Okay, what are you thinking?" And she said, "Well, my lab found 12 minutes a day." And so clearly nobody knows exactly, but also nobody is saying you have to do this like 18 hours a day to get some result. So the everydayness of it, or close to everydayness of it, seems to be a more significant factor. And so I would say, see what's comfortable for you. Maybe it's, I'm going to try this every day for a week. I'm going to try this every day for a month. Just see what seems right to you. And a time frame, 12 minutes, 7 minutes, and actually for me, every day is easier than say 3 times a week. That's not true for everybody, but for me, I know my mind, and what would happen would be, it would be Monday and I think I'll start on Wednesday. And then Wednesday would come around. I think I'll do it 3 times on Saturday. That'll count, but every day is every day. So you have to see what works for you so that it's fairly frequent, and just make the experiment. Set an app or an alarm or something so you don't worry about oversitting. And if you possibly can, don't evaluate until that period of time, the week, the 2 weeks, the month is over. And when you are evaluating, look at your life. How do you speak to yourself when you make a mistake, or things like that, because that's where you'll really see the change.
So there's a question from Michelle that she sent to me. She asks, are there plans to reopen the Insight Meditation Society in Barrie prior to the distribution of a COVID vaccine with social distancing or masks or anything like
that? There are plans to reopen. I don't know when. I don't know exactly what that will look like. I think we are working right now, because it's closed, on ventilation and air filtration and all those things which will help. I was talking, to the folks here from the bookstore before we started about when information first started coming out about times that one might be vulnerable to catching the virus. And the description was, a closed-in room with poor ventilation and a congregate group that's there for a long time. I thought, that's a meditation hall, anywhere. So we are working on that. We've had consultants come in, and whatever needs to change will change. Other things, are all being evaluated, and they're not so hard. I think food is not so hard because you can make individual things and, put it in boxes so people don't have to use the same serving utensils and stand in lines and things like that. So I think whatever we can change, we will change. And then we'll just have to see. There's also, it's a bi-directional process. We will do everything we can to make sure that it's safe. And, and then there's just the, is there a mandatory quarantine for people for 2 weeks coming into the state or the Commonwealth? Is there, transportation that people feel comfortable taking in order to get here? So, but I'm quite confident that it will open.
I've gotten a number of questions here, and I'm afraid we're not going to get time for all of them, but here's one from Violet. Being mindful of adding the future to the now, it's challenging, but feasible on a personal level. However, how does one carry this over to the professional space when those to whom we report or for whom we are responsible demand long-range planning and thinking?
Oh, I think we have to do long-range planning and thinking. I think that's a skill, and it's different than a kind of anxiously creating a world that has not happened and may never happen, born of that anxiety, like, this is going to stay miserable forever, or I'm never going to be able to cope in a month, or something like that. We have to do long-range planning, just as we have to look at the past and learn from different situations, where we now perhaps wish we behaved somewhat differently. But we can feel the difference. And it's also true that it's not always easy for us to think in a more focused way about something. You start out working on a strategic plan, and the next thing you know, you're like in India in your mind, and you don't even know quite how you got there. but we just sort of go off in this discursive manner. And so we can actually think, I think, in a better, more focused way when we realize that, and we can just come back to the thought process.
So I think we have time for one last question. We have one here from Nadine. She says, how would you describe spaciousness while meditating?
I think you could talk about that in terms of space, literally, or spaciousness. Sometimes there's an exercise we do. It was based on, I was working with a Tibetan teacher, and he said to us, I don't know, there were maybe 60 of us in the room. He said, now I want you to feel space. And every single one of us picked up our fingers and like poked them in the air. And he laughed and he laughed and he said, you're already feeling space. You're already touching space. Space is touching you. And so that's a movement to like that receptive mode. It's like just right now, feel like, oh, space is touching me. It's not like I have to do this extra thing in order to feel it. So that's one way that imagery is sometimes used, is to move us into that receptive mode. There's an idea of spaciousness, which happens when we're not involved with so many add-ons. There's a tendency of our minds to proliferate. And so things get kind of cluttered or crowded. And that's different than, like, the example I use sometimes is I was teaching with my friend Joseph Goldstein. And Joseph and I were in the kitchen having a cup of tea in his place. And somebody came in and said to Joseph, just had this really bad experience. So Joseph said, what happened? And he said, I felt all this tension in my jaw, and I realized what an incredibly uptight person I am. Now I always have been and I always will be. And Joseph said, you mean you felt a lot of tension in your jaw? And he said, yes, and I've never been able to get close to people, and it's never going to change. Joseph said, you mean you felt a lot of tension in your jaw? And it was really interesting for me, like watching them go back and forth and back and forth. And finally, Joseph said, why are you adding a miserable self-image to a painful experience? It's like painful enough to feel the tension in your jaw, but now you're going to be alone for the rest of your life, right? So that takes up a lot of space, all those things we add on. And if you think about not buying into them and having them fall away, even though you're left perhaps with tension in your jaw, that is spaciousness. It's like an open-hearted relationship with what is.
Wow, thank you so much. That's actually a great note to end on. Sharon and Chris, thank you both so much. This has been really an amazing evening. Audience, thank you all so much for being here. We really appreciate you spending the evening with us. And please remember to shop early and shop local this holiday season, and come back to more Northshire Live events. Thanks so much, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you all. Have a good night.